Hello, everyone. I am thrilled to be here with Sunita Solao from Upwork, Chief People Officer, incredible company, incredible product that they've built and brought to market. And so delighted to kick off our next series in our podcast on innovation and people. Welcome, Sunita.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I think our listeners would love to hear from you just a little bit about your background, your role at Upwork, before we really kick into the topic of the day.
Sure, yeah. I am the Chief People Officer for Upwork. So I have the privilege of looking after our people function and workplaces. And I've been here at Upwork for just a little over 2 years. Prior to that, I was at several other tech companies in the Bay Area.
And really interesting, serving a people role in a company that is all about people and a product that is all about serving people, a bit of a meta role.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm here.
And what was your background, I guess, prior to Upwork?
Um, Prior to Upwork, I was at Airbnb for many years, about 7 years, a variety of roles in the people function. So I'll go in the reverse order. And then prior to that, I was at eBay for many years, also in the people function. And then before that, I spent several years at General Electric. If For those of you working from this generation familiar with that company, I had a chance to live and work in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Shanghai, China with them for several years. And then before that, I was in India. Yes, certainly category making, eBay, Airbnb, and Upwork. I think that's something that somehow has come together in my career.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a world to be rewriting the rules of work now with the introduction of AI and all kinds of economic headwinds and tailwinds. So I'm really interested, maybe as a first question, as you rewrite the rules of work. So Upwork is really changing how, people engage in the economy and the workforce. What does innovation mean to you? You could go anywhere. What attracted you to Upwork and its value proposition to lend your talent?
I love that we are wading into this topic with this question. So personally, for me, I was fortunate enough, as I was just saying, that I was at Airbnb for about 7 years, and from the earlier days. And I had the opportunity to work with all the founders, worked very closely with Brian Chesky, who I think is one of the notable innovators of his generation. And my leadership and really the innovation DNA really took shape during this time. So that's why I'm sort of sharing this. And the mantra at Airbnb while I was there in the early days, and still is, I think, is to start with the impossible and really imagine what is the most fantastic, perfect, irrational, unreasonable experience that you could imagine creating for your customer. And the thing to do when you're doing that is, or thing not to do, I guess, is the most important thing, which is to not edit your imagination. I just remember Brian saying this repeatedly. You really have to let it fly, give yourself permission to really dream. And what happens with that is you end up with your version of the moonshot, if you will. This phrase is now, part of the lexicon. And then comes the process of sort of like actually working towards that moonshot and building, and then reality bites. But what I've learned over the years is that if you start with the impossible, if you get even halfway through, what you build is inherently better and more inspiring and aspirational than if we had started with what is possible, what can we do? And you edit and limit your imagination and start from that almost limited space, if you will. So this has stuck with me. I love this. I have a lot of energy for this, and I try to sort of bring that forward, or now I lead in that way, where within the people team at Upwork, for example, we always say like, let's try to leapfrog the experience. What is the best possible thing that we can design as a program for our teams? Start from there and then see how far we get, as opposed to just doing what's possible.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like my personal philosophy and passion that I bring to Upwork. And the reason I joined Upwork is because there is so much sort of congruence in how Upwork was already operating and what I believed in. Upwork has innovation in its DNA. One of our core values is build and break fearlessly. And the behaviors we try to role model are, we challenge assumptions, we take risks, We learn from our mistakes. And that really creates this sort of like wonderful platform to do everything that I was describing is required to build innovating programs and products. Yeah.
So powerful. And I want to pick up on something you said about the impossible and making the impossible possible. And what's interesting to me is, an organization like Upwork, the scale of growth, the number of ideas that need to be generated to solve the number of problems that are going to emerge with that pace. I mean, one person's impossible is limited to that one person's impossible. And now you've got to bring together a team of people who can all, reimagine the rules and rethink the art of options. And I guess, thinking about the diversity of people you need to bring into the organization, can you think of how that might have translated into better ideas, bigger thinking, new features, new functionalities? Like, tell me about maybe an idea that came out of someone on your team that really blew your mind, that might have been outside of the box, even at Upwork.
Absolutely. And so a key ingredient for innovation is diversity of ideas. And it's almost better to involve people who know nothing about the topic, because then they can truly imagine and unshackle themselves from what's possible. And that's when sort of like the magic happens, if you will. So one very specific example of what we have done at Upwork is the topic maybe not as exciting, but the outcome is exciting. So just go with me on this one. So I'm responsible for designing compensation programs. And, one very sort of core process to people programs is how do you determine salary and increases for individuals? And as managers, no one loves doing this, but it's a very necessary thing that needs to be done. From an employee's perspective, you want to make sure it's done well, there's no bias, yeah, it's kind of fair and equitable. And so one of our toughest customers for this process are engineering leaders, because you have all these ideas and how they can do it more effectively. And so we said sort of let's lean into this friction. And so we actually invited our AI and ML engineering leaders as part of the design process for this people program, if you will. So a seat at the table to co-design with us. And I said, imagine the possible, like, impossible. Well, how would you design this process? They're like, don't want to spend more than 5 minutes on this. And it needs to be very fair and equitable, because I don't want the managers and employees to be worried about whether it's fair. So it's like, okay, let's start with that outcome. And lo and behold, I mean, I won't get into all the various details, but kind of speaking to bringing in diverse perspective to something that is very inherently led by people team. And what ended up is we have a wonderful model helped by our ML and AI engineering leaders we've sort of trained a model that takes all the wisdom and discretion that a manager applies in determining someone's salary and compensation, and kind of spits out a very easy program. All managers have to do is say, yep, this makes sense. They can be done in 5 minutes. And it's actually almost bias-free. Nothing is ever completely bias-free, but because it's done consistently using same logic across the board, employees can be reassured that, it's a fair and equitable way.
The reason I love that example, two reasons. The first is that's a kind of cross collaboration you don't often see. I think HR and engineering don't cross paths that frequently. But to your point, I think you're playing to the strengths of people who wouldn't normally be at the table. And so from what we see is HR is often necessarily, they think in stories and emotion and human experience, and then engineers are often quite logical and how do we systematize and programmatically upend out. And so that's actually a perfect combination that's not intuitive. And the second reason that really stands out for me is very simply, they had to be invited to the table. So you had to create an environment, or your team had to create an environment, which was, hey, we need to include this outside perspective to come up with this better solution. So I like to maybe pick up on that for a moment. I think we all know diversity on its own doesn't generate results. You've got to have an environment where problems are intentionally solved by different people. So maybe talk to me about at Upwork, how do you ensure that people are included even where they don't necessarily seem to quote fit?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, many companies do this. A process we have at Upwork as well as something we call a hackathon. And we sort of run this, several times a year. And typically, again, like, of course, we are a tech company at the intersection of, hiring and tech. So So typically led by tech teams. There is a lot of energy in sort of identifying customer problems and building new ideas. And so, but again, like from at Upwork, we make sure that sort of my team, people team, participates very actively and enthusiastically as part of this. As you were saying earlier, we are in the HR tech space, so the product is also applicable to people solutions. And not just people team, but the legal teams, the finance team. And through collaboration of members of my talent acquisition or hiring team, and again, some members of our engineering team that actually build the product, we have come up with innovations like auto job post generators, where you can just again build some logic and ingest skills and requirements, and then it makes it very easy for our hiring managers to generate job descriptions very quickly and post them. And the beauty of this is we use it in-house, but we can also use it on our platform for our customers. So that's sort of like one example of really cross collaborating and bringing non-traditional disciplines to work together to build products internally and externally. And that's what makes the HR job at Upwork really fun, I would say. Yeah, for
I feel
us.
like at Upwork, you don't know what you're going to be doing because you have engineers building HR tools and you've got HR building product. So that
Yeah,
overlap, that's, I guess, must be what makes it fun.
yeah, absolutely.
And let me ask you, and this is a curveball, it wasn't in the pre-Q, but some of the most interesting anecdotes I've been hearing are about lessons learned and kind of areas where, maybe you put together a team that was diverse in different backgrounds and there was conflict that needed to be overcome, or, areas where maybe someone came from a corporate background, someone from a startup, and they had different ways of thinking and they had to really work it out. Are there any lessons that you can think of as you build a team solving this global problem where, you had to implement a program or a policy to make that a little bit more of a frictionless experience of collaborating, innovating? Does anything come to mind?
I think the startup and the sort of like the more steady state is definitely a tension that exists at Upwork. And I'll kind of speak to some things and let's see if we can draw out a nugget from here. Um, Upwork has been public and is set up for over 10 years now. And but we very much have the startup DNA. It was formed as a combination of two startups. And culturally, our core values are building and breaking fearlessly, playing to win as a team, moving with speed, simplifying things. So we very much want to sort of keep that startup DNA alive and thriving. And so the tensions that happen are because we are a public company, we have many obligations of like, SOX compliance and reporting and so on and so forth. So the pace at which sometimes things move and sometimes things need to move do collide. And so example of this is we are in the process of building an arena for humans and AI agents to collaborate and serve our customers' needs through this combination. But then, of course, we want to make sure that we are doing this responsibly. How are we using our data? How information is being exposed through these agents? So from legal teams and compliance teams, there is often this sort of like, hey, how fast can we go? And how quickly can we get this done? And what is the responsible thing to do to make sure that we don't break trust, we are compliant? And so a mechanism that we've pulled together is, and this is not a new idea, like we bring together tiger teams of teams that are pushing hard and needing to move fast. And then we bring in a people or a legal or a compliance counterpart who is then accountable to this team and is a point person for this team. And then they go back into there and unblock and sort of help accelerate so that you don't get caught into this like launch a ticket or like, this happens like a quarterly process. So we'll come back to you in 3 months. This point person then is responsible to say like, hey, this is a priority. This needs to move faster. How can we be nimble and help this team move faster? So that's something that we are trying. But it's a new muscle for us as well as we are accelerating the speed of innovating, especially in this age of AI.
You know what? You say that's not a new idea. So as a former lawyer, I can absolutely see how turning your compliance person into an advocate, giving them the job of like, help us make it happen rather than tell us why it can't. That's a big mindset shift. So I can
Yes.
imagine even, as a lawyer, how much I would have valued being on an innovation team and, breaking down boundaries. And that would have been eye-opening for me. It's a whole different way of thinking. So that's
Yes.
even intra collaboration by putting together those teams. Maybe my last question, just because it is quite unique to Upwork. 75%, I think I got that right, of your workforce comes from your own marketplace. So
Hmm.
that is unique. And I'm curious, how do you create an environment of inclusion for, independent professionals? So how do you kind of bake that into your product as well as your workplace?
Absolutely. I mean, a few ways to do this is creating clarity of expectations and sort of starting with the why. Because one of the things, and this also is another tension that we run into, is um, we have a blended workforce. And in our case, overwhelming majority are independent workers. And so there's this question of how much are the independent workers really owning the outcomes? How can we make sure that sort of they are pulling towards the same business outcomes that maybe the longer term FTE employees are pulling towards? And over the years, we have realized that if we have clear expectations and set really good contracts and clarify for each independent worker, why are you here? What are your outcomes? What are your deliverables? And make that clear not just to them, but also to the rest of the team. That really helps sort of like merge the lanes, if you will, with this mutual clarity. Because then the core team knows what to rely on this individual for, what to expect from them. And they obviously then are very clear on what is expected in terms of deliverables for them. The other thing we've learned through just experience is that the sense of ownership from our independent workers in many, if not all cases, is very high because they are entrepreneurs. They care about their output. They care about owning their output. They care about their reputation. So in terms of this sort of question of how leaned in are they to make sure that it's a great outcome from a business perspective, in reality, that challenge does not play out at all, actually, for us. So, going back to your question of how do we make sure that they're integrated, I think bringing clarity to what is expected of them, not just for themselves, but for their entire team, I think can really help sort of make space for them to deliver their work on the team. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so funny. Sunita, I mentioned I'm publishing a book, and a big part of the book is what drives retention. And
Hmm.
you've hit on, I think, intuitively on two of the key drivers that most companies miss, which is transparency and understanding what's expected of you, and ownership. So
Yes,
feeling a sense of pride in your work and getting recognized for that work itself. And to your point, that's a human instinct that it's not dictated by what form of employment you have.
absolutely. Yes. Great.
Any closing words or advice that you'd like to give us from your wealth of wisdom?
Gosh. Um, I mean, I would say, there is such a focus in the space of, in the people space, in the HR space around um, innovative cultures, how to build an innovative company. Almost seems like especially in the age of AI, how can we make sure that, inclusion and bringing different perspectives together, not creating inequities, these things don't come to pass. So I would say, like, as a people leader and an HR professional, as obvious as it is, examining your culture and starting with your culture is the place to start. Like, what are the behaviors on a day-to-day basis that are rewarded? What are the behaviors on a day-to-day basis that are punished? Are leaders some people who are vulnerable, who own up to their mistakes, who listen, who are curious? If we don't have those leaders at the top, what might we have to do to make sure that it's cascades from the top? So these are the things that were always important and continue to be important. in the age of AI and going forward in building enduring cultures that are innovative and progressive companies, I would say.
I would say even, we always say with ChatGPT and generative AI, strategy and information are commodities at this point. All you have is culture. All
Well
you have
said.
is your ability to execute. And I think you've really nailed that.
Great.
Well, such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your candor and your time, Sunita, and wishing you all of the best at Upwork.
Thanks for the opportunity. This was a lot of fun. Thanks, Lara.
Oh, I'm so glad. Take care.
Take care.